All right, we are back with Wilson's Hand, Wilson Steiner, filmmaker, storyteller, on Play It Forward today, talking about a Steiner Brothers production. And I think it's probably like it sounds, you and your brother, which is pretty special and cool. And I'll let you kind of fill us in on the film that we're going to be talking about, Protect the Forest, on yourself in that film. Thanks, Wilson.
Sure thing. Very happy to be here, and being witness to this Play It Forward model is fantastic. So I consider it an honor. Thank you.
Oh man, thanks. Really appreciate it. I'm glad that's what we're hoping to do, is hoping to serve. So
Well, and that is exactly what I was trying to do with this project.
yeah.
So I'm sure by now most people who are tuning in have at least encountered some news about the Stop Cop City movement. So that is sort of the nebula for this project. And I guess it kind of started after I moved to Georgia from Topanga, California. I decided to kind of like sew into the local community, and offer my services for a cause that I believed in. And we began following the story of activists who are, very entrenched in preserving nature. And so we partnered with the Center for Biological Diversity, and they had some ideas for us, some wonderful contacts that could sort of help guide our hand, or our eyes. And uh, really the amount of amazing individuals that we've encountered following this story, even well past the release date of, um, it's just been such an eye-opening experience, to be on the front lines of an ecological issue that's really getting a lot of attention, and still very little is being changed with the the trajectory of what will be developed here in Atlanta.
Well, it's Protect the Forest is certainly a documentary that's very important. Like a lot of documentaries, that's very topical about what's going on, and highlighting a important issue. This one is an ecological water issue, and I was not aware of it prior to watching the film. I'm kind of like tuned. I don't watch television. I have no media, newspaper, or anything, so I'm pretty blank about that. And I, was a little bit surprised about what's happening, and happy, I guess, to know about it, to have my awareness brought to the subject. And it's definitely a very important subject. I think the first question, I'll play it forward, really is, it's clear when you're talking about a documentary subject like this, it's an important issue. It's an ecological one. It's important for everyone in the environment, and there's a strong activist kind of a pull to it, for the spectators as well as the makers. And I would say, prior to even that, I talk about the inspiration of a story, and this particular story, there's something in it that, um, I think resonates with the makers as a call to action. And I guess, what is it in you, when you first became aware of this issue, in your psyche, in your makeup, that said to you, okay, boom, I got to do something about this. I got to make a film.
Well, I think deep inside is a desire, to exercise my empathy muscles, um, and that manifests itself in a lot of ways, when you're talking about art and the creation of audiovisual stories. So I think primarily it would be giving voice to the voiceless, So if you have an entire ecosystem that is being threatened simply for, essentially fear mongering and greed, in this sort of capitalist construct, there are very few people who think twice about, putting a bulldozer on a plot of land. And these ancestral lands are of particular importance to the Muskogee Creek, who I had begun researching for actually another project, a screenplay, and that had been long baking. My brother and I had a relationship with Georgia. My brother went to Savannah College of Art and Design, and he came up with this idea of a return to tribal society in sort of like a post-apocalyptic, post-pandemic society. And this was well before we experienced the pandemic. So coming out of it, when I moved to Georgia, I tried to sew myself into the Muskogee Creek culture, get to know people that, possess wisdom that I do not, and help understand the land that I was on. And I was fortunate enough to come into contact with folks who were really brave and stood up for all of the creatures that don't have voices and all of the trees that don't have voices. And unfortunately, they're still being ignored, but that doesn't mean the story's over.
Yeah, that's really very cool experience that you've kind of created for yourself and the journey that you've went on and gone on. And it's, I'm sure opened up that empathy muscle quite a bit and just brought you that wisdom and new insights, like art creation does. And especially, a journey like this one where you're really kind of embedding yourself in a culture to really understand it. And to help promote some of the inherent values that may be missing in our current day-to-day culture, American culture, dominant American culture, I should say, or predominant. And it's so interesting, I've kind of been touching upon this subject of, you said it really well. And I love the way you said it, exercising your empathy muscle and the desire was to exercise that muscle. And, what do you think that's about? Why did you want to exercise your empathy muscle?
Maybe this is a little far out there for an answer, but
Nah,
the
go.
first thing that came to mind, because actually I'd never been asked that question. The first thing I think is my desire to expand, and that's in terms of consciousness, in terms of sort of attachment to identity, and there is a lot in this particular story that we only really get to touch on. Begins to take your physical corporeal experience and really blow it out.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's not far out at all. Um,
Okay.
yeah. No, I mean it's so human. I think it's so human, and it's just maybe under discussed, but it's very, very strong. I would say need, in us, that part to evolve our consciousness. So that's awesome. Then, the second question to play it forward is really, I talk about now I've kind of gone brave enough to talk about the moral of the story. Um, and there are themes at play in the film. And how would I think often as filmmakers, we come to the moral of our story, not while we're telling it, but when it's over. So, and I think that's how often you don't create something that's didactic, talking down to anyone. So it's an authentic moral there. So what do you see as the moral of the story?
Well, I do think that there's a bunch of takeaways, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And there's probably more for me because I got to experience everything firsthand. For the audience, I would hope that they come away asking themselves how they're controlled by fear, because that's really at the core of this debate. And there are plenty of cultures out there who consider the impact of a development, let's say, for generations ahead. Commonly in Native American tradition, it's 7 generations.
Yeah.
And, for like the Rotary community, it's about good for all. What's the positive impact that's going to come from this? And if you weigh the pros and the cons tend to be projected and begin to start or continue a cycle of fear and repression that is imaginary, is completely illusory, and is up to us to guide. So my hope is people will see all of the activists and will hear the nuggets that we were able to glean, and really take a look at the very most intimate parts of themselves and say, how am I still being led by an anxiety about something that hasn't come true yet? Or how am I not being loving? How am I not stewarding the community around me, which could include animate and inanimate objects?
Yeah. I mean, that's something we can all relate to is, fear and not taking action based on fear. And when I hear you saying fear in relation to this context of this particular issue that's going on with the water and Cop City and wanting to develop the land, you're saying that the fears are projected. So it sounds like what you mean is that there's some level of thinking, well, if we don't do this, then this will happen.
Yeah, and then I think the investment in a training facility that promotes urban warfare, essentially, and the continued militarization of our police is stoked here. And I think that comes from a lack of dialogue and a lack of empathy. So when certain parties want to hold on to power, they will look down the road and see potential threats, and then they will make decisions based on those potential threats. And in this case, a threat to the status quo, which I would argue is beyond broken, would be people who want to live in the woods, for example.
People that want to live in the woods.
Yeah, for example, as a tiny example, but people who want to commune with nature, and people who are perhaps, tired of what's become our status quo. It was my hope that we would all receive the signals from the pandemic and take a break and reset and get reconnected to what's essential and life-giving. But unfortunately, lots of parties have doubled down and dug their heels in, and I think that's what's going on with this training facility.
Got it. Thanks, Wilson. Last question, play it forward. How have you been changed as a person since making this film?
Well, I think it was the second week of filming that I interviewed a number of folks in the forest and got to see how they were living. And I've always been an outdoors person, regardless of the amount of technology that I use and depend on. I always think that the balance is so it made me feel at home being with people who were comfortable outdoors and surviving on their own skills, and with this sort of overarching mode of existence that people label mutual aid. so during that introduction to these characters, it got dark. My guide left, and suddenly I started to hear pop, pop, crack, crack in the woods, and it didn't sound particularly good. I didn't know what it was. So I
Sounds
made
like
my way to.
gunfire.
I'm sorry.
Sounds like gunfire.
Yeah, I thought it was gunfire.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure it was. Uh, and it's complicated. The whole scene is complicated because there are various parties who are kind of heaped into the same category when politicians talk about this. But there were some activists who were not abiding by nonviolence, and a helicopter had been watching from overhead for hours to assess some property damage, and then tactically swoop in with some of the scariest
Oh, geez.
militarized police
Wow.
I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
I popped out of the woods with flashlights in my face and guns pointed
Wow.
my head. And of course, I had my hands up. I wasn't filming. I probably should have just left the camera on.
Right.
That would have been the smart thing to do, but I
Good
was
footage. I got you.
way too
No,
scared.
I think
Way
that's
too scared.
probably the smart thing to do. Yeah. What you
Well,
did.
some people like you'll see some of the footage was from Unicorn Riot, and they're amazing. And they kept filming through the whole thing.
Wow.
But while I was walking out of the sorry about that. While I was walking out of the woods, this protester, young girl, 20 something, came running out and just bawling. And she had no shoes on. And she asked me if I knew how to get out. And, I'm new to this completely. I didn't know the park really that well. And I just said, follow me. We're going to go to my car. I mean, that's just as long as I have a camera, I'm not a threat. I'm loud.
Journalist, right?
But as soon as we got onto the road and saw that there were police there, I was immediately assaulted. And if I didn't have balance, I probably would have fell on the ground and had my camera smashed.
Wow.
And so the very real threat of state sanctioned violence against people who are simply trying to make their voice heard in nonviolent means was palpable.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
And I guess I hadn't been on the front lines like that. So that was a moment that I think I'll probably continue to reflect on as I continue to document the issue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a, very scary, significant moment. I mean, how do you think that changed you?
Well, it certainly makes me more cautious going in again.
Yeah.
Since I've been back, I've taken some extra measures. But I think it strengthens my resolve in nonviolent communication, because
Sure.
I think at the heart of it, we all want the same things. Some of us are just, I think, I don't want to say, yeah, I guess I'll use the word conditioned. Some of us are more conditioned to think that that there's a fight to be had,
Right. Right.
and
On
it
both sides.
on both sides, yeah,
Yeah.
on both sides. That the way that you achieve any sort of win is when one person beats another, and I would just completely disagree with that. I think
Yeah.
through nonviolent communication we can achieve harmony, and that's at the core of the issue. I think if we were listening long and hard enough to nature,
Yeah.
that's what nature is telling us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful, man. I mean, it's a very evolved place to be at, and I think a very healthy place for a young person, person of any age. But I'm looking at you and I'm like, wow, you're there. You got it. I don't think I had it at that age. And it's a very complicated issue. And I think one of the things that resonates with me, and essentially what you're talking about, is how do you make change by loving the enemy? How do you love your enemy? And then they're no longer an enemy. It's not us and them, but it's just us. And how do us create a better situation for all of us who are essentially one? And that's a profound place. If you haven't, do you know Ram Dass?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, of course. All right. Well, then I mean, a lot of the work that he's done has been as an activist, and one of the most profound thing he draws upon as an activist is Gandhi's example. And he's a great nonviolent person that changed, brought down the British Empire, right? Or got them out of India at the very least. And he talks about Gandhi's example, and one of the things that is profound to me, and it's kind of slipped my mind, but I'll get it, is that the change agency is brought about within our own individual work as a person, and that's the most profound change that we can make. And when we are able to bring that into whatever we're doing, whether that's activism, then all of a sudden our message is imbued with that. And it's no longer a fight necessarily that can deflect from the real issues. When an activist brings in, whether it's righteousness or whether it's, a strong, angry message, their intention gets a little distorted and is less effective. And to be able to commit to that single-minded approach of just one of us, and how do we do that, it's just such a place, to go back to what you said in the beginning of like opening up your consciousness and really being able to step into a whole new world.
Yeah, well, it's hard for people to hear that, because the anger is so
Yeah,
real.
yeah, for sure,
Um,
for sure.
and it's really scary when you start examining where that anger is coming from, especially if you've been trained to weaponize it. And that could be, again, both sides.
Yeah, yeah,
And you know, talking again about projection, if we don't like something inside of ourselves, then we tend to see it in others, and we tend to demonize those, to make ourselves feel like we're doing the right thing, or that we're on the right track, or that we're holier than thou.
yeah.
And that is not very productive, because it just continues this cycle,
It does.
and
Yeah,
it gets further tangled. Yeah, so I mean, I love when people are loud and passionate, and it's a beautiful thing to see people congregate in the streets about something so vital. Um, but when that is, the examination of those feelings doesn't go beyond us versus them, we're just going to stay stuck.
yeah. That's well put. Thank you so much, Wilson Stiner, Steiner Brothers Productions. The film is Protect the Forest. Thanks for making it happen. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you for giving it a forum and amplifying these voices. All I really want to do is put a megaphone up to the water.
I hear that. That's beautiful. All right. Well, may we all listen to that voice coming from nature that's inside ourselves. On that note, thanks again, Wilson, for being here. Really cool what you're doing and how you're doing it. And my hat's off to you. All right, people, I'll play it forward. Peace. Thank you,
Thank
Wilson. Thank you, brother.